Welcome to First Day Kopites podcast. This is a podcast for Liverpool fans in Delaware and the friends of Liverpool fans in Delaware, of which we hope there are a lot out there watching. This is a special Scottish edition. Joining Sean and I today, we've got Roddy McOwan from LFC Las Vegas. He joined us actually, it was in September on episode 4, where he talked about the Las Vegas Supporters Club and shared with us this amazing video that won some awards somewhere. I can't remember what they were. I'm sure it's in line for some Emmys and Oscars and whatever else as well. It was a really big production. But so welcome, Roddy.
Thank you. Good to see you.
As usual, if you haven't subscribed, we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and you can see us on YouTube. You may prefer just to do the audio podcast, but your call. This week, our Scottish edition has 4 themes to it. This was the week in which we heard of the passing of Ian St. John, one of the great players in Bill Shankly's first Liverpool team that won trophies. He passed away at 82. We're going to kind of dredge up some memories. This might be hard, but I think we've got some interesting things to share about him and why he should be remembered. Turns out that this was the same week that King Kenny, is it Sir King Kenny or King Sir Kenny? Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the right order is. But King Kenny turned 70 this week, which, wow, gave me pause for thought anyway. We didn't talk about this before we came on, but today Glasgow Rangers won the Scottish Premier League for the first time, I think, in 10 years. And Roddy has a personal interest in, and I'm sure, celebrating that. But obviously, for all the Reds out there, they happen to be managed by Mr. Steven Gerrard, who, along with Kenny Dalglish, is probably the other player that's in line in people's arguments about the greatest player in Liverpool's history. And then we're going to round it off, and we're not going to spend too long on this, but Scotland's current captain is playing for a team that looks a bit devoid of confidence. So we'll just have one question, which is, what's your best coping mechanism right now for the way the Reds' results are turning out? And that will close us. One other thing, I completely forgot about it last week. Andrew Beasley, who was on episode 27, sent us a copy of his book. So if you're listening to the podcast, if you want to reply to any of the feeds and let us know you're interested, we'll put you in a draw. It's called From 18 to 19. And if you listen to the podcast, there was a lot of great stuff in it about the kind of stats that help explain why Liverpool was so good last year. Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean, who's going to ask the questions this week, because he, for some of certainly what we're going to talk about, he probably was not on this earth. So he's going to ask the questions of people who've got more experience of some of these things.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't a Liverpool supporter during a lot of this, and I was alive for part of Kenny's career, but definitely wasn't a supporter at that point. I was a little kid, so I only know from video clips, and I don't know much about the Saints, so we can start there. Roddy and Paul, if you want to, just talk about what memories you have of the Saint and that great team in the '60s that sort of kicked off this, what we know as Liverpool Football Club today.
Sure. Do you want to start, Paul? Or?
Sure. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, and I think we've got kind of sketchy memories. But I think one of the things that is probably worth knowing a bit about, kind of the St. John was a star in an era where footballers were not paid the magnificent sums they're paid now, and he actually, I think, left school at 14 and worked in the Motherwell Steelworks. I think we touched on. And so he wasn't someone who was in someone's academy for 10 years and kind of had all the surroundings. When Liverpool did buy him, he was a record fee, and apparently the Liverpool directors were a bit wary about spending £35,000 on this guy. Well, but it turns out it was a good job they did, because he scored. I didn't know this. I looked this up. He scored 22 goals in the season, the first league championship winning season in 63-64. but probably there's a couple of memories that I have of certainly in playing, and they're not strong, but I remember sitting at home as a young kid and seeing the goal he scored in the 1965 Cup final, which won the FA Cup for Liverpool for the first time. And it's important to recognise that that was when people wanted to win the FA Cup, as opposed to where we've ended up with this weird tournament now, where it feels like some teams are trying to get out of it, like us in the third round. It was a magnificent diving header. It actually came from Hunt's Cross, Roger Hunt's Cross, which I always think is wonderfully poetic, because there is a suburb of Liverpool called Hunt's Cross, which I don't believe was named after the aforementioned pass to Ian St. John. So.
I think it's funny talking about places in Liverpool, and I think Liverpool and Glasgow particularly, have this sort of like commonality across so many things, whether it's working class background, whether it's football, whether it's music, humour, etc. One of my favourite stories about Ian St. John was apparently in a church in Liverpool, where the minister had written on the chalkboard outside, "What would you do if Jesus came to Liverpool?" And some wag wrote underneath, "Move Ian St. John to inside right." So, apologies to any religious folks on the phone, but that seemed to be a poignant story. And my memories are vague too, because I really first saw Liverpool when I was growing up in Edinburgh, Scotland, when they came to play Hibs. And that was in the era then, when by this point, Keegan had joined and Clements and all these guys. So St. John was kind of like, I think at that point, on his way out the door, if he hadn't left already by the time they came up to Edinburgh. But I mean, he obviously had a really sort of like working class background. Crazy enough, in his first game, he scored a hat-trick in a crazy amount of time, right? 2 minutes and 30 seconds for Motherwell in 1959, which is the year I was born. Wow. 2 minutes and 30 seconds against Hibs, he scored a hat-trick, which is obviously one of the fastest ever recorded. And then you're right, you talked about the club record signing him. And I think it's widely quoted that Shankly basically said when he signed Ron Yeats and Ian St. John, that's when the club's fortunes changed. And it's interesting, isn't it? Just over a couple of players. I mean, if you look at what's just happened recently to Liverpool, we signed Van Dijk and, like Mo, and, then there's Alisson, etc. And all that sort of like changed the fortunes too.
Yeah.
And I think, Shankly set the mode about the fact that you started your team with a great goalkeeper, you had a great centre half, as they were sort of like commonly known then, a great midfield general, and then a great centre forward, and then you could build the team around the rest of it. And I think that's really where it all started with him. But and then he made his debut against Everton in a kind of like not an official game, yeah. And he scored a hat-trick in that as well, but they get beat 4-3.
Wow.
Poignant that we've just seen Everton sort of like turn us over again, maybe. But yeah, and then that great goal in 1965. So.
Yeah, first time of the century, important to note.
Yeah.
Everton, just saying.
Yeah, one thing we didn't mention before, but he had a career, sort of a second career afterwards, as a commentator and an analyst, right? Do you remember any of that, kind of experience that part of his career?
Yeah, because because he went into management for a while, right? And I'm not sure. Well, at the end of his playing career, he ended up sort of like coming back to Merseyside and playing underneath in Tranmere Rovers, playing underneath Ron Yeats, who was his manager at the time. And then he went off and disappeared off, and then came up and had this sort of like great television show with the Saint and Greavesy, it was called, So you had that Scottish and English banter going on. You probably had the Liverpool and the Spurs banter going on, and they were an ideal foil for each other. So I mean, I have fond memories of that. I mean, that was kind of like one of these sort of like great chat shows, and they had all sorts of different stars on it and making some funny quotes along the way and just talking about the game that they both loved.
Yeah, it was interesting actually. A lot of the UK obituaries, people who were sports writers, talked as much about his appearance on the Saint and Greavesy show as they did about his Liverpool career. It was almost as if if you were not a Liverpool fan, then that made a bigger impact. There was one other thing that I should share that I do remember as well. Apparently, it turns out Shankly wasn't very good at giving people bad news. And so as he was being kind of, I guess, eased out of the team, there was one game he played, I think, was it in Newcastle, where St. John found out he wasn't in the team from like one of the opposition's, coaches, because he'd seen the team and St. John wasn't in it and he didn't know he hadn't been picked. So I think there was a bit of, from him and Hunt at times, a bit of anger with Shankly because he left them out but didn't actually necessarily tell them he was leaving them out of the team. I remember in 1968, and I went and checked this, they played Vitoria Setúbal in, I guess the version of the Europa League back then was called the Intercities Fairs Cup. And I think we'd lost 2-0 away and it was 1-1. And Hunt and St. John were on the bench, and I think they both came on as subs. Which I wasn't even sure they had that many subs back then, but they both were on the pitch and scored goals. And it was weird because the away goals rule had just been introduced, so the crowd were still waiting for them to come back out for extra time when Liverpool had lost basically on away goals because Setúbal had scored earlier in that match. But that was kind of a sign of where things were headed in terms of he wasn't playing as frequently. Liverpool weren't as successful, and arguably they didn't kind of turn over the team fast enough. Obviously, they got there because they won things in the early 70s, but that's a memory anyway of Ian St. John, but probably not in his best era.
There was a couple of quotes I was looking at earlier actually in prep for the call. I'll see if I can pull one up here while we're chit chatting. But one of his great quotes was that this game's going to go all the way and end at the finish. And okay, like, well, when else might it end?
Like Yogi Berra.
I thought the other good one was that he talked about the fact that Kenny Dalglish, who we're going to talk about later, but Kenny was actually at Melwood as a 15-year-old schoolboy. And he came on trial and went home afterwards. And it was only later that Bill Shankly realised that Dalglish had been there as a boy and went ballistic. And he said, "How did we miss him?" Yeah. He said that Kenny just had the football brain, he was born with it, and you can't give it to the people. He had that natural born talent. So that was quite interesting, you know, that I didn't know that about Dalglish actually. I'd kind of like missed that somewhere, that Kenny would actually been at Anfield. So
that was definitely not in the documentary.
No.
So speaking of King Kenny or Sir King Kenny or King Sir Kenny, however it's supposed to go, he turns 70 this week. We wanted to touch on your thoughts on Kenny, and guess you have here, Paul, that he was 39 when he last won the Premier League with Liverpool, and the Athletic recently ran a piece of interviews people who knew Kenny at various stages of his career. So if you want to start this time, Roddy, if they'd interviewed you, what are your memories of King Kenny? What's the kind of first few things that would come to your mind?
I was fortunate enough to see Liverpool when Dalglish played. I actually moved to Liverpool in 1984, where I met my darling wife from Liverpool, even though she's a Toffee. But that's solely because it's like the rest of our family were Toffees, and they all married Reds fans though, which is quite interesting. But so I got to move in 1984 to Liverpool and saw Kenny every second Saturday at Anfield, and I mean that team was just phenomenal. But the rest of the team had to be phenomenal to keep up with Kenny. And when he was with Celtic, I mean, you alluded to the fact before that I might be celebrating today a little bit too because I'm a blue nose north of the border and a red nose south of the border. But I mean, he just ran riot in Scotland. I mean, he was a phenomenal striker and played in a great Celtic team as well. And then they went downhill after they sold him. And when my other memories of him at Liverpool were just, his brain was like clearly 3 or 4 moves ahead of everybody else. and as I said, they had such a great Liverpool team at the time that the rest of the team could keep up with them, Rushy and all the rest of the guys. But when he played for Scotland, he really struggled. And I think he struggled because the rest of the team just weren't that good.
Yeah.
And Kenny was 2 or 3 moves ahead of them, and obviously they were 2 or 3 moves behind. But he did score, of course, for every Scotsman, been harking back to beat the old enemy. It was hard enough, but Dalglish scored an absolutely phenomenal goal against England, and he put the ball between Clemence's legs. So I'm sure, I'm sure after that there was lots of ribbing between the two of them in the dressing rooms that they shared and whatever. But he was just fantastic, absolutely. He's probably, and I saw George Best play, and I saw Johan Cruyff play, and I saw Pele play. At different levels, at different stages of their career, but to me, Dalglish was ahead of all of them. Clearly head and shoulders.
Yeah. Wow. So there's lots of different things about Kenny Dalglish. I mean, I think probably the one thing that comes across actually in some of those interviews is just kind of his humanity. Actually, I mean, just the job he did, kind of leading the team, and in some ways the city after Hillsborough, when clearly that was not in the job description, but I just think a kind of a magnificent person, and I was really struck by one of the photos they had in that article, which was Margaret Aspinall from the Hillsborough committee, whose son passed at Hillsborough, hugging him when I think Liverpool, I think we qualified for Europe. I think it was the goal that we ended up in 4th place, probably 2018, was it? But it was just so spontaneous, and the joy in his face is just something to behold. And in terms of a footballer, I think the only footballer that I have seen play who was as equally breathtaking as John Barnes, and there's not much bias in this, obviously, right? Because got to be a Liverpool player. I have seen Cruyff play, and clearly Cruyff was pretty exceptional. But I remember in the summer of '77 when Keegan left, it felt like, we just won a European Cup, and now we're doomed. And he played about 3 matches and scored these incredible goals from angles that you didn't feel like existed, and that it passed. It was only there as long as he wasn't playing. It passed as quickly as that thought had arrived. Final thing to say actually is I saw Ian Rush. Can't remember where this was. He was giving an interview and someone was asking him about Dalglish, and he said when he started playing with him, Dalglish would say, "You need to run there." And first time he didn't, because he didn't think Dalglish could get the ball to him. And then Dalglish would pay the pass and then be really pissed off at him for not being in the right place to get it. And after that, he followed instructions, is what he said. So it was awesome.
I think he's a very quiet character. I had the privilege of meeting him at Leicester City a few seasons ago. I took my son over for his 30th birthday, and Jamie's hero was Stevie G. We'll come on and talk about that. But my hero is King Kenny, and I'm actually good friends with the Leicester City CEO's husband from a business point of view, and we get spoiled, and we get into the director's box, and who was there that day with Liverpool, but was King Kenny. And I was just like, I was just blown away. I think I could have just got down on my knees at that point. I don't need to watch the game, thank you. Actually, I wish I hadn't watched the game because they beat us 3-1. But I think, just meeting him, it was awesome. And he was very gracious, taking a picture with me and Jamie for Jamie's 30th birthday. And when you look at him in the picture, though, he has that dour Glasgow look on his face. But a lovely man. And he had a tremendous sense of humor too. I mean, I don't know if you remember that when he was the manager.
Yeah.
And he was getting ribbed by the journalists and asking him about who was going to be playing in the team on Saturday. And he basically turned around and said, "What are you asking me for? It's the missus that picks the team."
Yeah, I do recall they had a lot of fun at their expense. Actually, Roddy, I have a question for you, because in the documentary, which I think is called Dalglish, that we watched as a group last summer. He was a Rangers fan growing up, right? And didn't he live right by the Rangers training ground?
Yeah, and he had a trial for Rangers.
Oh,
And
wow.
apparently they told him he was too small.
Yeah, yeah.
Aye, okay. Well, he ended up with big boots to fill if he was too small.
Right. They sound like the kind of people who are on that list with those guys who turned down the Beatles, right? Because they said that guitar groups are on the way out. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty funny, isn't it? Pretty funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, I obviously don't know too much about that area, but I was watching a documentary recently, and they were talking about how when Keegan left, Keegan was almost like a modern day footballer, and he was like almost like a rock star, kind of like, he was loved the attention, and I don't know, something about his hairstyle, like all this kind of stuff. And so it sort of just builds on this idea that when he left, everybody sort of thought that, oh well, what are we going to do now? And then Dalglish, comes in and is even better. And then, without watching too much of him play, I've seen people sort of describe him almost like he had this ability to kind of glide through a defense that you don't really see, from many players. And, so I don't know if either you can kind of reference that at all, just in terms of like his playing style without someone that's seen him play, like full match. And, if you just see clips, you can't really get a sense of that type of thing, for me anyway. So.
Well, he had a real sniffers touch around goal, didn't he? I mean, because he scored some phenomenal goals. And, I think from your point earlier there, Paul, about Rushy, he probably scored a bunch of goals that nobody else could have scored.
Mm-hmm.
He was probably at the time, if you look at like Messi now, in terms of like Messi seems to have the ball tied to his feet, and I think Dalglish was very capable of that as well. But a tremendous passing ability, and I mean, for a number 7, which back in the day was traditionally the right wing, that's not really where he played. And I as I said before, I mean, he's still my favorite footballer of all time in terms of sort of like watching him play.
Mm-hmm. Liverpool did some weird things with their numbers, though, right? They had so this was very weird in the 80s. Their midfield, one of their midfielders wore a number 5, like it was Ray Kennedy and Ronnie Whelan. So the 7 once was owned by Ian Callaghan, but once it passed to Keegan, then it became, I don't know, the star of the team had number 7. Not that they were. There's one thing that I would say, if you haven't seen him play, that a comment people often made about him was that he wasn't very fast, but that the first 5 yards were in his head. So I don't know if he ever said this, but there's a quote about Gretzky about he went to where the puck was going, not where it was. That was very much, I think, Kenny Dalglish. He would anticipate things better than anybody else.
So
So
there's an old program, Sean, in the UK called it was called This Is Your Life.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever seen the one with Kenny Dalglish, but that just shows you much more about the guy.
Yeah.
And the fact they had to do all sorts of things to get him on the program, I think, because I mean, that would not have been his forte. He wouldn't have wanted to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was somewhat familiar with his character, kind of like post Hillsborough, and we actually had a guest on last year, and I'm forgetting her name.
Oh, it's Chris, right?
Yeah,
it was the 3rd episode. Yeah.
She talked this funny story where they were at like a Hillsborough charity dinner, and he was doing some weird thing. I can't even remember what it was, but he was basically just like kind of goofing around, letting like everybody at the table start laughing, kind of lit the whole thing up. So it just, that little story to me told me a lot about him. And he, of course, went to all the funerals, went to all the events. It's just that says a lot about him, I think, as a man. So moving from one Liverpool legend to another, Rangers and Stevie G are having a good time as we're having a bad time here. So I guess that's good. It's a good pick me up for you, Roddy. Rangers won the Scottish Premier League for the first time in 10 years. And they're managed by Stevie G right now. So, assuming that today you were celebrating that a lot more than you were focused on the Liverpool match, I hope, Roddy. What's it been like? I mean, it's been such an amazing season. You know, Celtic have had a lot of great seasons recently too, but I feel like this one tops any of the ones they've had. They've just been unbelievable this year.
Well, I think you know, so I'm sort of like old enough to remember Celtic winning 9 in a row, and then old enough, obviously, and was very keen supporter when Rangers won 9 in a row, and they were going in to win 10 in a row, and it was like it was going to be a breeze. Celtic were just in a shambles. They brought in a new manager that nobody had ever heard of, and Rangers basically Gascoigne stayed. Walter Smith was the manager. But everybody that season had sort of like talked from an Ibrox point of view, was like, this was the last season and they were all going to leave. Walter Smith was going to retire, Gaza was going to retire or do whatever he was doing. And they blew it. I mean, they completely blew it. Now, if you're a conspiracy theorist, you would look back at that and go, Celtic need Rangers and Rangers need Celtic, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they both need a rivalry. We'll sell more paraphernalia, we'll sell more shirts, all that good stuff. Never mind all the other connotations of things that go on in the background, which are not particularly healthy to talk about. But
yeah.
So if you're a conspiracy theorist, you would now go, well, there's Celtic back at 9 in a row again, and they completely blew it.
Yeah.
But they didn't really blow it. I mean, like Rangers, the record is unbelievable. They've only conceded 9 goals, which is incredible. Only 4 at home. They haven't lost a game. And they're actually on track. Piece of wood. They're on track to actually match the Invincibles that Brendan Rodgers did the Celtic in 2017, 2018, I think, when they got to 106 points. And I think when Stevie G came in, I mean, Rangers have obviously gone, I mean, like they were bankrupt, 2012, relegation. If you look back at some of these results, it'd be like Liverpool getting beat by, I don't know, Stockport County. It's maybe just as well we're not in a cup game actually at the moment, because we'd probably get beat by Stockport County. No disrespect to Stockport County. But the I think at the end of the day, you know, he joined 3 years ago and sat down with the board, and I was just reading this today, and basically said to them, right, let's be really realistic here. Where are we as a club? How much resources have I got? How much support are you going to give me? What is it we need to do to bridge the gap? And how much time are you going to give me? Now, I mean, that's pretty ballsy. And, you know, really having just come out and just managed the under-23s for Liverpool, which, sad but not true, I have no clue how he actually did in that role. And then to go and take on the biggest job in Scotland, if you're a Rangers fan, the biggest job in Scotland, if you're a Celtic fan, whatever, the second biggest job, and go in with that attitude to say, right, let's have a reality check here. Extraordinarily mature, and the club clearly gave him the time, because he's won nothing. I mean, when they won at Celtic Park a couple of years ago, and he had his face in the TV camera, and then it got to after Christmas, and the club went sideways and never caught up with Celtic, and you know, Neil Lennon just having been fired at Celtic Park because they've just been a train wreck this year. But even if they were playing well, I don't think they would have caught Rangers this year. They've been such togetherness. They've managed to cope in playing in front of Ibrox with no fans. Bizarrely enough, the complete opposite of, you know, what Liverpool have managed to do in recent weeks. And I saw a video today of him celebrating. I don't know if you saw that, but they were in the training ground all celebrating with the players today. And there was beer all over the floor in the training ground, obviously because they're celebrating. And there's a clip on YouTube of Stevie G pushing people aside, and then runs, and then with his suit on, and then basically just goes flying right across the floor of the training room, beer everywhere.
I didn't see that. I saw the clip of him driving in to the match. I think it was today, and it's just, you know, just so happy for him to see that. I mean, all their supporters were out with the flares, and police like pushing people out of the way of his car, kind of coming through, and you know, banners up and all that. And yeah, I mean, I remember when he first started there was this weird clip where he was like touring the dressing room, and it was like, you know, in hindsight, it was really kind of dumb, because, you know, what's he supposed to do? But he was walking around the dressing room, people were making fun of him like he didn't know what he was doing there. And I seem to remember him being under a lot of pressure towards the end of last season. Something he said to the board. I don't know what the whole story was. You can maybe fill that in, Roddy, but it's fantastic to see, him kind of have this success as a manager. After all, he kind of had to put up with at Liverpool, kind of putting the team on his back for so long.
Yeah.
It's just great to see him have this kind of success,
Well, and you wonder what goes on in his psyche, right? I mean, I'm with you. I think we're all so disappointed that he wasn't at Anfield when didn't win the league with Liverpool, despite all of his loyalty and all the rest of it. And of course, he still holds himself personally responsible and still lives and breathes with a slip. Which, of course, I mean, at the end of the day, it wasn't just about that. We all know it wasn't about that, but that's where the focus is. Yeah. And then here they are, sort of like so far ahead of Celtic. You just wonder as a man what goes on in his head about. Well, the good news is I'm not on the pitch, so I can't. but he's in a much more focal point position where he could make a lot of slip ups, the wrong choices, or an injury to his captain a few weeks ago, which hasn't destroyed the where they've gone with it. So I'm just absolutely delighted for him as a person that he's won a league title. And obviously I'm biased because I'm a Rangers fan. And I met Stevie G a couple of years ago here in Vegas when he was playing for LA. And they came down to play El Clasico against San Jose Earthquakes. And they played at a baseball stadium here in Vegas where the University of Las Vegas play. And it was a bit bizarre, right, on a baseball pitch, which kind of like goes off like that as a kind of E. And the goals were all set up in an odd bod. But I had my Liverpool top on, and I was the only one that he came over to and then signed a program for me. So I actually met him, at which point I sent a note to my son and said, look, here's the photograph. And my son said, Dad, well, I can't use the F word online here, but basically he told me he hated me and loved me at the same time. Stevie G, absolutely phenomenal job. I just hope he goes on. It's bizarre that his contract finishes at exactly the same date as Jurgen's.
Oh wow! Huh.
So actually, there were a couple of thoughts there, and I don't know if you noticed, Sean. But one of the links I was trying to make was Kenny Dalglish was 39 when he won his last title at Liverpool. Steven Gerrard is 40 now. Actually, interestingly enough, so just small connection. But I do think there are a couple of things to add, because I read a piece in the Athletic today because I didn't want to read about any English football, and it was about Rangers, and it was a really. So if I was the Rangers coaching staff, I'd be a bit concerned about how much stuff was shared in this article, because they talked about training methods, they talked about how the press works, how they coach people in terms of like simple messages, which might be helpful to an opposition coach, I think. But what was fascinating was that what he had created there was very similar to what Klopp has created, where so whilst the focus is on Klopp and the focus is on Gerrard, like one of Gerrard's right-hand people is Michael Beale, used to be the under-23 coach at Liverpool, I think. And Gerrard has said that this guy, I'll have to coach him another 10 years to know as much as this guy. It did make me think, okay, maybe that's a pathway, and maybe that's our last topic that we might want to talk about. But maybe there is a pathway where Klopp decides he's kind of done, and Steven Gerrard has a very similar. It's not all about me; it's about the team I create around me. It's about the tactics we use. So I thought that was fascinating.
Him and Gary McAllister. I mean I would never have thought of Gary McAllister getting into that role at all. I mean that totally sort of like escaped me. I actually met Gary McAllister the same day as I met Kenny Dalglish, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there is something to. I mean, and I guess where I'm at is obviously like Rangers have been unbelievable this year. I think Gerrard would have to do this for a while longer before I'd be comfortable with him taking over a club like Liverpool personally. But I think there is maybe something to the idea that there's a little bit of humbleness or more sort of understanding of what it takes to be a manager from his perspective, as opposed to some other former players that were great players. because I guess my sense would be that he would understand what he doesn't know, just knowing a little bit about him. And it seems like that's a trap that a lot of former players fall into, is that they try to do too much on their own. So it's interesting that you say that, Paul, because that's sort of what that's sort of how I would take that, is that he understands that, he needs to be able to rely on other people to do the things that he doesn't know.
The one thing it did remind me of, I don't think we had this conversation, right, where someone had reviewed what do all the Premier League teams do to warm up. So this is Chelsea under Lampard, and they described like this very old-fashioned kind of warm-up routine that they went through, which suggests, it's like, why isn't he picking up from the biggest and newest and the greatest? Why is he doing this old thing they probably did at Chelsea 20 years ago?
Yeah. So moving on to I guess a less fun topic, maybe. I don't know. Scotland's current captain is currently playing for a team that looks pretty devoid in confidence. Should we all just hit the reset button on this year? The result today against Fulham, was just sort of another, kick in the I was, I don't know, fortunate or not, I had to leave for a family engagement right before halftime, and I haven't gone back and watched the match over, and I'm not sure I'm going to be anxious to do that before I go to bed tonight for the rest of the match. So I didn't get to see the full match today, but so I don't know if you both, Roddy, if you want to go first, kind of, if you have any thoughts on where we are in the season, maybe some thoughts today on the match, maybe not specific on the match. I know for me personally, I've just sort of taken the view that, like, it is what it is, and club's going to be there next year, and we'll go again. But anyway, if you both want to kind of give any of your thoughts.
Sure. Listen, I think we haven't even had a chance to really celebrate winning the league.
Yeah.
And the players haven't had that chance, right? With the fans. Yeah. I mean, other than a couple of games when we had a couple of thousand people in Anfield, and it made a huge difference for them. And they said that. I think to having gone 68 games unbeaten at home was incredible. And at some point I had to burst. And I guess we would all have anticipated, if you'd been looking at the upcoming fixtures at the time, Man City would have been the one that would have been worried about. And yeah, maybe that psyche played into it. I don't know. But today's game, I mean, I was a really happy boy this morning when I get up before the game started, because Rangers had secured the title north of the border. And you watch the game, and in the first half, I mean, they came out all fired up, all charged up. But yet another change in the structure of the team. And if you do watch it tonight, and what you watch the highlights, when Mo screws up in the box, because ultimately Mo had his face towards where he's facing his own goal, and he tries to be cute about it, and then it just gets screwed up. You can see all of the players at the same time. They're either looking up to the heavens, or they're looking down like that, or they've got their heads in their hands, and right on half time, right? I mean, like the worst time to have lost a goal. Yeah. But frankly, for me, and then I'll hand over to Paul, I think that every team that plays us, first of all, they're playing the champions. So our boys have never had to defend that. They had to defend the Champions League when they were champions, and it didn't work out too well last season. And, who knows this season, because at the end of the day, they're playing really well in the Champions League. So the season is not lost by any stretch of the imagination. The title's clearly gone. Top four is going to be a real struggle. I think everybody actually hoped that Man City would thrash Man United today just to make that a bit easier, but that didn't happen either. But I think every team is coming to Anfield now going, or playing Liverpool going, we can have a go at them. And every team that's beaten us, whether it's Burnley or Fulham, with the exception of City, I'm going to push them aside, Chelsea, every one of these teams looks hungrier for it, looks keener to be on the pitch, is desperate to throw themselves in front of the ball and do whatever they want to do or can do to stop Liverpool scoring goals, including goalkeepers like playing out their skin. And Jota had one shot today that was an absolute belter, a volley with his left foot, which under any normal circumstance would have hit the back of the net. And the goalie made a phenomenal save. But that was really the only phenomenal save he had to make.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, one healthy perspective is to say, let's wait till the crowds come back and kind of refocus on next season. Because I mean, it's just we've talked about this before. I mean, there's so many negative dynamics, right? You've got the absence of crowds, the games, and I've mentioned this a few times, so stop-start as well, which does not suit us. So when the Fulham goalie, and I think Daz, hello Daz, hope you're listening, mentioned that the goalie had average of 35 seconds for every goal kick. And he was complaining that Liverpool weren't complaining about that. But this seems to me to have become a feature of like lockdown football, that you can take a lot more time out of the game because no one's pressing you on throw-ins and goal kicks. So, you know, that it's not that on its own. It's not the refereeing and the VAR stuff on its own. You know, it's not the injuries on its own, but you put all those together and it's really difficult. And now they just look a little devoid of confidence, a bit fragile, like the head's going down. Like the ball was bouncing around in the Fulham penalty area, like a ton pinging everywhere. And every little ping goes in the right direction for Fulham. Like the Mane header, you know, bounced out just in the right place for to be able to clear it rather than come to a Liverpool player. Just feels there's too many things conspiring to make him successful. I spent a lot of time reading The Athletic today, obviously, but there's a absolutely wonderful piece about it from our friend Cy Hughes, who's been on the podcast. It was essentially about how crap football is without, well, he was talking about without fans, but it's the sort of camaraderie and all the things that go along with it. And where the defeats seem worse because there's no one to like console with, and the wins don't seem that great because it seems like empty, and you know, you're having to pause to celebrate because of VAR. And then, you know, when the goal gets choked off, as it often does against us, then, you know, it just adds to the general sense of there's not been a lot of fun. There's not a lot of quality in some of these games. I don't know. And I don't know what the viewing figures are, but I gotta believe there's way less people watching than there were. You know, I think I watched one game half of us this weekend, a bit of one game, which I can't remember which one it was, and I turned it off because it was just it just wasn't very interesting. Not a lot of skill being exhibited.
Yeah, I agree. It's the quality.
The false crowd noise is awful.
Yeah.
Awful. In fact, you know, I was watching last weekend, full circle back to sort of like something we were talking about at the beginning. But so my daughter was born in Wales. And of course, I'm born in Scotland and my wife's English. So last week, Wales were playing England at rugby. And there's none of this false crowd noise, right? Of course, Wales did the business, but the referee, you can hear the referee during the game. There's conversations going on. The referee actually explains things during the game, which is awesome for somebody, you know, if maybe you're watching the game and you don't quite fully understand all the rules, which, you know, with all due respect to our American audience, there's sometimes, you know, people just don't fully understand or comprehend the full rules of things. So yeah, this false noise in the background. So you don't get the build up that you would normally get, to your point, Paul, in terms of the atmosphere in the stadium, Liverpool screaming down the wing, and suddenly the crowd energy get into it. It's not just for Liverpool. I mean, it affects everybody. But it's really interesting to me, right? Liverpool, Tottenham, and Sheffield United, just three teams that performed really well over the last couple of years. Look at Sheffield United. I mean, like, how much money would you have got going to the bookies and saying they'll be bottom of the league and they're going to get relegated?
Yeah. There's been some of that in other leagues too. And I did see a graphic today, Paul. This is the first thing I've seen where I think you could like handily make this connection, is that the rate of away wins apparently is way up. So 2 or 3 times what it normally is, to the point where it's almost even, like 50-50 at home or away wins. And normally, you know, the home wins are much higher. So you know, to me, that points directly to not having the crowds. You know, it almost seems like it's an advantage for the away team, you know, the way that the numbers work out, which is certainly the way it's worked out for us. It almost, I'm almost beginning to wonder. This is like, a conspiracy mind thing coming on. Like, is it like depressing for the players to play in an empty Anfield or something? Like, because we're clearly, it seems to me like we're playing worse when we play at Anfield.
Now,
It's strange. It's almost like we had the experience. I think you mentioned this before, Paul. We had the experience of having like 2,000 fans or whatever, and then we took it away.
Yeah.
And since then, we've just been horrible at Anfield. I mean, it's consistently since then. So.
And to be fair to the team, I don't think that. So I know we're on a lot of feeds where people are like, "Oh, that was terrible, and everyone should be fired, and we need a new team."
Yeah.
It's percentage, right? It's not like this team's crap, we need a new one. It's like these are some really good players who have had to endure a whole load of things, and that point where whatever percentage they're giving, which is not 12% or 15%, it's probably 80 or 90, is just not working.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting today, though, if you go back and watch the highlights, I was watching it with the missus today, and Trent Alexander-Arnold comes on around about the 70th minute. He looked like he's just got out of his bed. I said that to my wife. I went,
yeah.
He looks knackered. He literally looked knackered, like he just got out of his bed. And you just wonder if the pressure now of being the champions, and they now know that they can't win the league, and they also know that Klopp's given up on the top four, at least if you believe what he actually said publicly, which is kind of sad. But then have the players got that in their mind? But on the positive side, I'll take the Champions League one year and the league the next. That's fine.
So Wednesday's huge, I think, because you get a big reset if we can avoid a 3-0 loss to Leipzig. We get a huge reset then, because we've got weeks off. Some players won't be going international breaks, thank goodness. Maybe there's a chance to kind of do a lot of psychology for them.
And the best thing I read
in Budapest.
Yeah, right. The best thing I read today, I think, is that I read Twitter someplace, somebody said Klopp, we could lose every single game for the rest of the season, and I still wouldn't want Klopp gone, because he's the best thing that's happened to this team in 35 years. What he's done for this team. I mean, he's more than earned the right to have a stinker of a season. And it's not really his fault. There's been so much adversity, like you mentioned, Paul, and like you said, it is levels, and it's sort of the way our team functions and the way it's built seems to be disproportionately affected by the COVID pandemic in terms of the camaraderie and the amount of training that we're able to have, and plus the injuries and the chopping and changing. Our team functions on rhythm and sort of drilling in where people are supposed to be and when, and there's just been no ability to do that on top of all the injuries. So,
I mean, there was on the OLSC worldwide chat on WhatsApp today, there was a lot of slamming backwards and forwards, and we need to have a reset and a restart and get rid of the players of this and players of that, and we shouldn't be playing Milner, and he's too old, and there's too much sympathy going on for some of the older players, etc. I don't buy any of that. I mean, it's a satirical comment a little bit. Do you remember when Brendan Rodgers was there near the end of his managerial career at Anfield, and he basically said that he'd lost the crowd, right? I mean, the crowd had no more belief in him anymore. Mm-hmm. Well, Jurgen's lost the crowd, but literally, not conceptually when they're in the stadium. He's literally lost the crowd, and he feeds off that. And we shouldn't. The guy's a human being. He's just lost his mother, and he couldn't even go to the funeral. Yeah. And it's like she's obviously a massive influence on him, and you all these things combined, makes it really hard.
Yeah. It hit me today, especially. It hit me that like it seems like Klopp needs a break, but he obviously can't take a break. And maybe these next few weeks will be sort of the medicine that we need to just sort of build that team spirit back together, kind of get back on our feet a little bit, and make a push towards the end of the season here.
Yeah, I agree.
I could not take the OLSC chat today. I briefly glanced and just moved on, which is how I ended up reading Cy Hughes and about Rangers and Steven Gerrard. So, but I do feel encouraged by this conversation. Yeah. It's like.
I mean, it's good for any. I mean, whether you're a Celtic fan or not, I mean, I think if you're a Liverpool fan, you got to be happy for Steven Gerrard.
Yeah.
It just like that. Let that be your uplift of the week there, because he no one deserves it more than him. So
Exactly. And his next game is his next league game is they're away to Celtic in 2 weeks' time.
wow.
Although the more interesting one is
Celtic will be giving them a guard of honor. That'll be interesting.
that'll be up there with the City Guard of Honor, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Good job. Yeah, move on.
Run off before it's done.
But more interestingly, they've got Europa League on Thursday, right?
Yeah, against
Slavia Prague, who beat
Prague,
Leicester. Beat Leicester. That'd be interesting.
That'd be tough. That'd be tough.
But it'd be interesting. Again, I'm interested to watch that game, having read the thing about tactics. Hopefully, Slavia Prague haven't read the thing about his tactics. But so we're probably running over time, aren't we, Sean?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So just Roddy, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We appreciate us.
Great that you reached out
for our Scotland edition. That's it. It's pretty awesome.
And hopefully, I talked about YouTube before. In Scotland, I've always thought that we should have something about called YouTube, which is actually an insult to somebody that's sort of like being, you're a bit of an idiot, right? You're a tube. So maybe we should have their own station there.
So obviously, YouTube was not founded by a Scot. That's
no.
So just quickly, thanks to everyone who's stayed with us and is listening, watching. Next week is the 1 year anniversary of First Day Kopites. We won't call that back in those days, but we're going to do an anniversary edition, and maybe we'll do some greatest hits. I don't know. I haven't worked out the agenda, but I haven't worked out who's even on. But 1 year anniversary, which is also the 1 year anniversary of something else, which we may get to talk about. The lockdown and pandemic and all that stuff. Sean's looking at me.
St. Paddy's Day. Unbelievable.
Yes. So again, Roddy, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Sean.
Yep. Thanks.
Hosting. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good to meet you.